Hey guys, welcome back. We're doing a video today on Pluto and Plutonian relationships specifically. So we're going to dive into Pluto in our love and romance relationships. Most importantly, this can be applied to other relationships, but the emphasis of this video is going to be on Pluto and romantic partnerships. All right, so Plutonian relationships. Now, I have been called to talk about this topic for some time now, and Pluto, is very near and dear to my heart. It is a planet that I am most strongly affected by in my personal chart and in my life, and I've really been called to work with Pluto in many different aspects of my life. That said, I think it's important for people to have more general information about Pluto themes and how it can manifest in our romantic partnerships. This will be helpful if you're just studying astrology broadly and want to look at this in comparison to your chart and kind of reviewing past relationships or maybe a current relationship that you're in, or you can use this more fundamentally with working with synastry charts or composite charts, Davidson charts, etc. This is a very vast topic, so it could potentially be a series in the future if you guys like topics on Pluto or Plutonian relationships. I tend to attract clients and people that watch my social media channels that have like similar dynamics, and I think that goes for pretty much anybody that either makes content or has a client base business or things of that nature. They tend to attract people with similar experiences or similar chart placements, etc., etc. So I do tend to attract people with, heavy Pluto in their chart, or who have experienced people in their lives that have heavy Pluto in their chart, things like that. So if you guys do like this, let me know down in the comments so that I can make more videos, because it's one of my favorite topics. Now, one thing I do want to add is that it is helpful to see how your Pluto manifests in your own specific life. So taking a review of where your Pluto is in your natal chart, what aspects it's making to other planets in your birth chart, is it hitting any angles, is it in an angular house, etc. That will be helpful for you to look back on your personal life in general and see how it has played out and how it has applied to different areas of your life, especially the house that it lays in. In the birth chart, Pluto can show us where our most profound transformations are going to be in our life. And that said, looking at the house position of Pluto, this can show up what area of your life Pluto is going to be the most dominant, and Pluto is a very dominant planet. That said, it is also a very subconscious planet. It is associated with psychology and the subconscious, so sometimes this is more of an undertone of your entire life, depending on the placement and the aspects that Pluto makes. And the aspects that Pluto makes to other planets, this is going to show you where some of those Plutonian themes could show up or be shown through, if that makes sense. Difficult aspects to Pluto could also indicate things that could potentially trigger the darker side of Plutonian themes and make it harder for you to endure the transformational aspect of Pluto. Easier aspects could enhance the higher octave of Pluto and help you transform and alchemize and be the phoenix rising, so to speak. So we know that Pluto is the furthest planet out in our solar system, and Pluto is associated with Hades in Greek mythology. Pluto is the Roman name. They're kind of interchangeable, but for the most part, you guys probably know the name of Pluto. So Pluto is associated with Scorpio in modern astrology, and the 8th house can sometimes be related to both Pluto and Scorpio. And Pluto is death and rebirth. It's transformation. It is alchemy. It is the underworld. It is the depths of our subconscious, and it's also our fears, our hidden fears, our inner motivations. It can be a strive for power. It can be power struggles. You see a lot of that energy with Pluto energy, and it is a lot of times in evolutionary astrology, which is the type of astrology that I personally practice, is it's seen as the actual soul itself, or the collective soul, from the perspective that we are all one and that we all come from a common source. This is like the depths of the collective consciousness. Pluto is associated with our deepest fears. It's also guilt and resentment and sexuality. This is a different type of sexuality than we might find with Mars. And Mars is the traditional ruler of Scorpio. With Pluto, it is still sexuality, because Mars is our innate animal instinct, desire, attraction. I think of Pluto sexuality more as the alchemized version of sexuality, or sacral chakra energy. They're both technically sacral chakra energy. but it's a different octave. It's very much a transformational type of sexuality. Now, when we're talking about Plutonian relationships, the themes of Plutonian relationships, I guess it is kind of helpful to understand that we're talking mainly about synastry and or composite charts. To keep it vague before we go into like some of the placements you can look out for and stuff like that, Plutonian relationships are going to have this magnetic pull. It is usually one person is very much drawn to the other person, or both people are basically drawn to each other like a magnet, and it's very quick, instinctual, and magnetic in a lot of ways. There is this undertone of irresistibility and just having to have that person, place, or thing, if you're referring to different aspects of life. Pluto is also a planet that deals with our addictions, very much so. You know, Scorpio and Pisces are both signs that could be associated with addictions or overindulgence, but Scorpio and Pluto are definitely energies that involve such things. So when these types of relationships manifest, they are very addictive. Now, actual addiction could be present in these relationships, or it can just be an addiction to each other, like codependency. There is this feeling of not being able to live or breathe or to have anything else besides the relationship, at least felt from one person's perspective. Usually it's felt from both people's perspective, but not always. But there's this feeling that you can't live without this person and that you are stuck with this person. It's usually not until way later on in the relationship where you're already stuck in a Plutonian relationship until you wake up and realize, oh my God, I'm in a Plutonian relationship, or I'm in a toxic relationship, or I'm in a codependent relationship. And you finally realize what you have gotten yourself into, and you have essentially dug your own grave, no pun intended. Pluto is also a planet that deals with power, as I mentioned, and this comes with control. There's a lot of controlling dynamics within these relationships, and it usually manifests as one person essentially controlling what another person physically does, even mentally. This is a very psychologically based connection if you find yourself in one of these types of romantic partnerships. So it's deeply embedded in your subconscious very early on. But there's a feeling of being controlled, and there's a feeling that you need to control each other. And this can manifest as many different things: possession and rebellion. Oftentimes you see cheating or infidelity in these types of relationships by one or both partners. And it's just a devastating cycle, really. Now, keep in mind, these are some of the lower manifestations of Plutonian relationships. Ultimately, if you find yourself in a Plutonian relationship, all of them are going to alchemize at some point in time. I have never seen, personally, I'm sure maybe it's possible that you find yourself in a Plutonian relationship that doesn't alchemize. And what I mean by alchemize is that it transforms you in some way, because it's kind of inevitable. I personally have never seen a Plutonian relationship manifest without it alchemizing into something, or alchemizing at least one of the people that are involved in the relationship. It usually alchemizes or transforms both people in the relationship in massive ways. So that is why a lot of times you have to go to the underworld, you have to go into the depths of your subconscious, and you have to go into the darker sides of life in order to alchemize and come out the other side to becoming an even better person. So there is a beauty in this. There is a higher octave to this, but the thing about Pluto is you have to experience those depths of Hades in order to find your way out and to see the light. It's a very transformational experience, and it's also can be a very confusing experience. Sometimes you have this remorse, or you have extreme empathy for the situation, and it's like this weird glue that holds you together, and you feel like you'll never be able to separate or get away from each other. And in reality, what is going to alchemize this situation is detaching yourself from the situation. Now, obviously, you need to look at synastry and composite charts to figure out if this dynamic is playing out, if it would be considered a Plutonian relationship for you, because there's people that can label things in such a way that maybe it isn't manifesting that way. There's lots of different ways that relationships can play out. So you just need to be careful about jumping to conclusions. And I guess that's why I want to make a video on this, is to educate people. These are some of the most powerful, transformational, and life-changing relationships you will ever be in, ever. That said, they are some of the most difficult and they can be somewhat traumatizing, but all in all, they are there to transform you, and that they certainly will. Now, I was talking about looking at your own personal chart to see how Pluto is aspected in your chart, to kind of get a feel for how Pluto has played out for you in your personal life, and that will help you if you're looking at synastry and composite charts. Now, when we're looking at synastry, there is going to be some overarching themes. Obviously, Pluto is going to play a big role. Now, one person can be played out as the Pluto person, or both people can be played out as the Pluto person or Pluto people. And this could be an overlap of energy dynamic shifting if both people are presented as a Pluto person. A lot of times it will manifest as one. I don't know. I've seen both in clients with, 50-50. Sometimes it'll be just one person playing out the Pluto role, and it's very evident that one person's Pluto is attached to an angle or a personal planet in the other person's chart. And sometimes it'll be both people's Plutos that are attached to an angle or a personal planet. So it really just depends. Keep in mind that wherever Pluto is in your natal chart, this is usually going to manifest, especially if it's contacting personal planets, or if it's on an angle, or if it's in an angular house. It's usually going to manifest as some sort of trauma. I say that loosely because sometimes it's psychological trauma. It doesn't necessarily have to manifest as physical trauma, but that will give you more inclinations on how it will manifest for you when you're looking at synastry. Now, when we're looking at synastry, of course, we want to look and see what's going on with Pluto. We want to see, is Pluto touching or conjunct, of course, to an angle, or conjunct to a personal planet or any other planets in the chart? Or is it making any harsh aspects like a square or an opposition to the other person's personal planet? And you look at synastry overlays for both people. We also have to keep in mind that Pluto is a generational planet. It moves extremely slowly. It also has an erratic elliptical orbit, so it moves through different signs at different rates of time. And if you're in my generation, you were born with Pluto in its home sign of Scorpio. So that is actually, I believe it's the shortest amount of time that Pluto spends in a sign, even though it is Pluto's home sign. That said, everybody in your generation is going to have the same Pluto sign as you, or if you're on the cusp or closer to one end of the Pluto and Scorpio generation, or say you're Pluto in Libra or you're Pluto in Sagittarius, if you're closer to the edge of those Pluto in those signs, then Pluto may be in neighboring signs for your partner. We have to keep that in mind, because, just because if you were born within the same year as your partner, your Plutos are going to be conjunct. I wouldn't consider that a Plutonian relationship unless there's other things going on in the chart. Now, if you naturally have Pluto in Scorpio and you have Venus in Scorpio too, you might be more naturally drawn to Plutonian relationships. You like that intensity. You like that Plutonian energy to manifest in your relationships. Or if you have, Pluto in the 7th house, you're naturally going to be drawn to Plutonian relationships, or, those types of dynamics that play out in Plutonian relationships. Also, if you have, say, Venus and or Mars in aspect to Pluto, those types of relationships are something that you could be drawn to. So that's just something to keep in mind. Oftentimes I see a connection with Pluto and Venus. And of course, Venus is very closely tied to our relationships. It is our value. It can also be tied, of course, to our money, but it is really how we show up as the feminine energy in relationships. So there's usually a tie to Venus in regards to an aspect to Pluto. There could also be overlaps in the 8th house. This I see a lot as well. If you have, your Venus falling in a partner's 8th house, or if your person or one of the people in the dynamic have Pluto in the 8th, that could also manifest that way if you have a planet that falls in their 8th house or on top of their Pluto, conjunct their Pluto. But planets that fall in the 8th house, this can certainly manifest. But really what we're looking for is heavy Pluto contacts with personal planets. So we're going to look for the Sun, the Moon, Venus, sometimes Mars. Of course, if you have a hard aspect from Pluto to Mars, that's going to be somewhat explosive in the natal and or in synastry or composite, but we're really looking for heavy Pluto contacts with the personal planets. Also, I've seen it manifest with the north node or the nodes in general, north and south node, and or the angles, specifically the ascendant or descendant axis. And when you have Pluto on an angle or a personal planet, there's going to be this very intense pull, that magnetic energy that I was talking about, and it's just very much irresistible and also binding. It kind of gives a flavor of Saturn in a way, because it's like, it's there and you feel like you're going to die with this person, or you feel like you have to be with them or you're going to die. Has this very dark undertone, underworldly like tone to it. So there's this very binding and also magnetic energy. Now, when we're looking at this, we need to kind of understand who is more Plutonian, and that can need a little bit of delegation and really analyzing both natal charts, because it might not present itself just at first glance. You need to take all things into consideration about both natal charts, as well as the Synastry and Composite and whatever other charts you would like to run. But Synastry and Composite obviously being at the forefront of compatibility in romantic partnerships. That said, you need to take everything into consideration to see who is more quote unquote Plutonian, or whose Plutonian energy is exerted in a more negative way. This can also manifest more so if one person is more Plutonian and one person is maybe, say, a little bit less Plutonian, and the person that's more Plutonian has actually done their shadow work. So if the person that is quote unquote less Plutonian hasn't done their shadow work, then they're going to show up more Plutonian because they haven't done their shadow work and they haven't gone through Hades in the underworld and alchemized it. So that said, where I was going with this is that the person with the Pluto on a personal planet or angular point, they are going to hold the power in the relationship. We also need to look at what planet Pluto is contacting, because depending on what planet Pluto is contacting, that is going to be the part of the other person that the Pluto person has the control over. So if Pluto is on the ascendant, the Pluto person is going to hold the power of that person's physical body. That is where it can get dangerous. I have seen that manifest very badly in many different charts. But that said, we need to look and see what personal planet Pluto is contacting, and that will give us inclinations of what the Pluto person has control over. These relationships can also be very much obsessive. There can be a fear of abandonment deeply embedded within the dynamic of the relationship, and also embedded in each person. That's why it's extremely necessary to analyze both natal charts, and also analyze and evaluate, how much work has either person done on themselves. Have they tried to work through their Pluto problems on their own? Because if they haven't, they're certainly going to manifest in romantic partnerships. If people have done their inner work and have actually worked through their Pluto problems, then it's very likely that some of these issues won't manifest even if you do have Pluto on a personal planet. But usually we're going through life and we meet these partners, these Plutonian relationships, at points in our life where we need to transform. So we're usually resisting the work in some type of way. So that's when we encounter these Plutonian relationships in order to accelerate our evolution and to basically propel us into alchemizing ourselves. And the paradox to this is that we can get stuck in these Plutonian relationships and stay stagnant until we release ourselves and ultimately alchemize the pain into our beauty, into our light, right? Now, there's also an element of like walking on eggshells in these relationships, specifically with the personal planet person or the, ascendant descendant person. So there's this element of doing whatever you need to do in order to keep the peace in the relationship, or to just, avoid conflict, so to speak. So there's this walking on eggshells type energy that is involved in these dynamics. So they're willing to do just about anything to stay with this person. They cannot see themselves without this person. Neither person can in these relationships. But these aren't, going to play out like Neptunian relationships. Neptunian relationships are definitely different. Uranian relationships are very different. Uranian relationships will manifest like, lightning fast and just come and go like super quickly. Neptunian relationships will be very romanticized and fantasized, and there is addictions and substance abuse that's involved in Neptunian relationships, but Neptunian relationships are going to have a completely different flavor. It's it's a totally different topic that maybe I can go into on another video. If you guys want to know about Neptunian relationships, we can definitely make a video on that, but let me know down in the comments. But also I wanted to touch on composite charts, because composite charts, of course, are going to give you more of the overview. When we're looking at composite charts are going to be the energy of the dynamic together, as opposed to synastry charts. You're looking at two individual charts laid on top of each other. Composite charts are basically taking the midpoints of both charts and putting them together to give you the overall energy dynamic of the connection. So we're looking for Pluto contacts in both charts, the synastry and in the composite. And you're usually going to find in Plutonian relationships, you're going to find heavy Pluto aspects in both charts. Also, the Pluto person can oftentimes manifest as really wanting the planet person to be dependent on them in some way, shape, or form. This could manifest as financially, physically, emotionally. They're very much going to like get them hooked and then pull their energy back, right? And this can be very addictive for the planet person. And this is often seen as you know, a manipulation tactic in some way, shape, or form. The planet person wants to keep the Pluto person wants to keep the planet person very much stuck so that they never leave, so to speak. There's basically an integration of love and fear. It's like mixing the two together. It makes love very scary, and it confuses the two. That's why I say these relationships can oftentimes be very confusing, because by the time we wake up and realize that we're in Plutonian relationships, it can be very confusing on how to get yourself out. So you a lot of times will stay stuck in these dynamics, or you feel like you can't go on, or you can't live without the other person. How could I possibly get myself out of this? Even though your conscious mind knows that you shouldn't be in it, it can be very confusing. And because Pluto is a planet of power and the Pluto person holds the power, the planet person oftentimes feels very powerless, and they feel like there's nothing they can do to escape. So that's why they eventually cave in, and they're willing to do just about anything to keep the peace and do anything to keep the other person, essentially. The planet person will oftentimes feel powerless, and they will blame themselves for whatever is playing out in the relationship. Like I said, these relationships can manifest in lots of different types of trauma, whether it's psychological or physical or addictions, attachments, codependency, substance abuse. There could be literal death in these types of relationships, or just Hades, death type themes that play out. And it can be very scary, confusing, and challenging to navigate these types of things. So we're really looking for contacts, heavy Pluto contacts in both synastry and in composite, as well as the natal charts. You kind of have to take everything into consideration. These relationships are very complex and oftentimes very long lasting. So I think that's all I'm going to touch on today. I think I kind of rambled on enough for this video, but if you guys like this video, there is a lot more where that came from on Pluto in general, you know, Pluto in Plutonian relationships, and all types of other topics. So if you guys liked this particular video and want more on Plutonian relationships, let me know down in the comments. But as always, guys, if you want to book personal astrology and or tarot readings with me, you can email me or shoot me a DM on TikTok or Instagram. All the information is going to be down in the description box below. Also, if you want to sign up for my newsletter, I put a link at the top of my link tree in my bio, so you can do that. Either way, guys, I appreciate you being here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help my channel out, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.